Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now I've got that expert panel that I promised you earlier. Sir Simon Mayall joins me now. He's the former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff and an MOD advisor on the Middle East. And Natasha Hausdorff also joins me, Legal Director of UK Lawyers for Israel. You may remember her from the week because she went viral for taking on the BBC and correcting them on a few matters. Lovely to see you both. Obviously in the newspapers today there's a lot of talk of ceasefire. Let's just first discuss whether that's viable, possible, desirable. Natasha?
Unfortunately, those calls for a ceasefire are simply playing into Hamas's hands. Every time there have been previous ceasefires, it seems to be a situation which Israel ceases, Hamas continues to fire. And let's not forget that there are still over 200 hostages being held in Gaza.
Would you be more in favour, then, of Keir Starmer's humanitarian pauses? I mean, there is a problem here, isn't there, in that the IDS are saying to people of Gaza, go south, go south. Hamas are quite happy to use those people as human shields. So you've still got this intensely, densely populated region with people just, as far as we can tell, sitting ducks.
Well, the key problem with humanitarian aid going in, as it is now continuing to do, is diversion to Hamas. We have seen a long history, heaps of evidence, of Hamas continuing to divert aid to its own terror purposes. The key is to get the civilian population to the south of Gaza and ideally across the border into Egypt. That is what the international community ought to be calling for, because that's where they can be properly looked after and humanitarian aid can be provided without it being diverted to the Hamas terror operations.
So, Simon, I mean, what are the practical problems facing the IDS when it comes to trying to attack a terror organisation in a civilian population?
Well, they're huge. One always keeps coming back to Clausewitz. This is politics by other means. And so, as Natasha said, and many commentators, of course, they are very conscious, the IDF, the Israeli government, very conscious that the news cycle runs fast, the battle of the narratives continues. But the requirement, in fact, almost the imperative to crush Hamas is really, paramount in their security requirements now. Yeah. But they're also very conscious that Hamas will play the propaganda game, which they've done so successfully often. They'll continue to use Gazans as human shields. They'll use mosques. They'll use hospitals. But equally, the Israeli security forces will have to go, defence forces will have to go in. They're going in at the moment, as we know. There's been what we call preparing the battle space, shaping conditions. They're doing raids in there. They've clearly got a lot of an awful lot of surveillance above. They'll be using, of course, bunker busters to try and destroy the tunnels, take out the command network. We know they've taken out some of the top Hamas commanders. Yes. But eventually they will have to go in, and at that stage, of course, we will find the awful collateral damage, let alone, obviously, straight military casualties.
Yes. Let's talk about collateral damage, Natasha, because the sort of word on the street of London yesterday, as the marchers for pro-Palestine causes took to the streets, was that a ceasefire has to happen because, at the end of the day, it simply isn't fair that ordinary men, women and children in Gaza are the collateral damage of what the IDF needs to do to defend Israel from what happened on October the 7th. So is it right at all to accuse the Israelis of war crimes if women, children, babies get killed as collateral damage for Israel defending itself?
The only war crimes we have been seeing so far in Gaza are those perpetrated by Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organisations. Let's not forget, it is not just Hamas that crossed the border on the 7th of October.
But if the IDF are killing people in pursuit of their defence of their own realm, then isn't that problematic as far as the Israeli position is concerned, in accordance with the Geneva Convention, etc.? I mean, you know that there is a civilian population there, and yet still you are attacking Gaza in defence of what happened on October the 7th. So there is a dilemma.
The calls that we have been seeing and the rallies in favour of Hamas are perpetuating the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza and preventing Israel from exercising its lawful rights of self-defence. And we've heard from international lawyers also in the House of Lords that this is what calls for a ceasefire amount to. It is plain, and any international lawyer or military expert worth their salt has been clear that in every previous operation in Gaza, Israel has not only upheld the laws of armed conflict, but gone above the requirements. And when we compare that with conflicts around the world, the global civilian to combatant ratio is a very disturbing 9 civilians killed for every 1 combatant. Those statistics put out by the United Nations.
Do you not believe the statistics that have been put out by Hamas, stroke the health authorities, stroke the Palestinian authorities on how many people have been killed?
There are a lot of matters to unpack here. Certainly the numbers coming out of the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas-controlled, are not trustworthy figures. There's no distinction being made between combatants and civilians. If you were to tell me that those were all combatants, terrorists that were killed, I think we would all be congratulating the Israeli Defence Forces. The fact of the matter is that the death tolls in the Gaza Strip are arising from Hamas shooting fleeing civilians. We've had evidence of that. They're arising from Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas rockets that are falling short in the Gaza Strip, indiscriminately killing civilians. We've had evidence of that. And they are directly the result of Hamas's use of human shields. These are the war crimes that we need to be talking about. But the allegations that are being levied at Israel are tone deaf to the proportionality initiatives that the IDF upholds. Those include, of course, the warnings, text messages to individual householders, leaflets being dropped, the knock-on-roof tactic that has been discussed at great length. Those developments that Israel has sought to achieve together with requests for civilians to flee to the south, when they are being prohibited from doing so by Hamas roadblocks and Hamas bombing their own civilians, that is what the world should be calling out.
Let's bring Simon in now, just militarily. What can we learn from operations, say, in Iraq? And how does one deal with Hamas when you've got these tunnels, hundreds of kilometres of tunnels under Gaza? We've heard about the use, perhaps, of sponge bombs. What can you tell us about how we could perhaps even advise the Israelis on how to tackle this?
Well, there will be a lot of advice. You know, we've done a lot of what they call phibio fighting in built-up areas, training. The Americans have. The Israelis certainly have, because, you know, they built a sort of mini urban environment with tunnels, with cellars, with high-rise that they've used to train on. None of it will take away from the difficulty of this. But at the end of the day, if they're really going to try and establish a genuine security cordon, they're going to have to destroy that tunnel network. Which means they're going to have to dominate the ground above in order to go below.
Presumably
some of it can be done with bunker.
That without killing very many
bunker
civilians.
busters will do it. A lot of high explosive penetrative bombs will do it. But ultimately, if they really want to secure it, they're going to have to clear the ground above it in order to go below it. And again, as we know, and I back up Natasha on this one, there's no doubt about not just aid, but a lot of the complaints about electricity. Hamas are still funneling off electricity to feed the ventilation systems in their tunnels. It's a very wicked problem. But I think what they will know, because they're great students of military history, is the complexity, is the requirement to minimise civilian casualties wherever possible. But ultimately, if they're going to do this, what they can't do is another in-out, wait for Hamas to, regroup again. Back we go again. Meanwhile, Iran, there's a wider issue here.
I mean, you must be worried about wider problems in the whole region, right?
I think one of the big issues we've got is how much Israel can guard its northern border while conducting its operations in Gaza, or another intifada in the West Bank, or the Syrians making a go for the Golan Heights, or Iran encouraging Hezbollah to launch its... So it's a horrible tactical situation, but it's part of a much bigger security situation.
Natasha, I mentioned earlier you sort of went viral for your clarification of some of the points that were raised to you by a BBC journalist. Did you incur a lot of hate after that? What's it like at the moment being a relatively high-profile Jew on the airwaves and seeing the marches that we've seen on the streets of London this week?
Well, actually, the flood of support from around the world has been utterly extraordinary, and I'm only sorry not to have been able to respond to the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have written to say that they know a great deal of what I'm saying to be true and accurate, and that is reflected in reports also of the high-level military group in previous operations that Israel has had to be conducting in Gaza, but that it's so rarely heard on the airwaves, and that is something that I'm determined to challenge. So I take comfort and a great deal of strength from that support. I know that reasonable, sensible people understand as an exercise of common sense, not just international law, that Israel's track record of protecting civilian life is unparalleled. I mentioned that 9-to-1 global ratio. The last Israeli operation in Jenin in March of this year saw a combatant to civilian ratio of 0.6-to-1. It was a very different style of operation, but 0.6-to-1 is unprecedented in international affairs, in armed conflict, and that is testament to the measures that Israel takes to protect civilian life,
Natasha.
measures that it's continuing here.
Natasha, Sir Simon, thank you very much indeed for your expertise this morning.